This is episode 22 with Doug Stewart.
Welcome to the Quarter Life Comeback Podcast, the show that empowers you to become the hero of your life's journey. With your host, Brian Tier.
Hello, guys and girls, and welcome to another episode of the Quarter Life Comeback Podcast, episode 22. And today I'm super excited to be speaking to Doug Stewart. Now, Doug has an amazingly inspiring story. At a young age, he was diagnosed with sleep apnea and ADD, dyslexia, narcolepsy, and a whole host of other conditions, and was basically told that he was stupid. In fact, Doug couldn't even write the alphabet at age 11 and was pushed through the whole of school. However, thanks to his height and athleticism, he made his way into college, where he met an academic advisor who refused to let him fail and called him out on his victim thinking. Doug is now a TED speaker, a writer, facilitator, trainer, and expert on mentorship. Plus, he's also 6'7" with good hair and a better beard. So we're basically twinning it in this episode. Speaking of this episode, we're going to touch on why Doug was still coloring in and drawing in his 20s, what is a victim mindset and how to break free from it, why the current mentorship model is outdated, who are the 5.5 mentors you need and where to find them, and just a hint here, they're closer than you think, and why experience is for fools. As always, you can get the links and resources we mentioned in this episode at briantier.com/022. But for now, sit back, relax, and let's go hang out with Doug Stewart. Welcome back, everyone, and a big welcome to today's guest. I'm speaking to Doug Stewart. Doug, thanks for coming on the Quarter Life Comeback.
Thanks for having me, man. I appreciate it.
Yeah, now before we get into this, we spoke about it just before the interview now, but I think we're probably the biggest combination of guest and host on a podcast ever.
I think so.
There's about 13 feet and 2 inches between the two of us. So, although I do know Shaq has a podcast, so he might have tipped that somewhere along the line.
I'll take number 2 to Shaq, I guess.
No way, man. No way. Right. So Doug, you reached out after the interview with Jason Goldberg, and I checked out your stuff, and you've got an awesome story. And I wonder, for the people listening, if you can just share a bit about that and, what you went through growing up and through your 20s.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd be happy to. So the main reason that I reached out is because I was so impressed with the work that you're doing and how important I think it is to have discussion around the quarter life comeback. I had my own quarter life comeback a little while ago, back in about 2006. The problem was no one was talking about it, and so it wasn't an available option to have a quarter life comeback. And so, long story short, I was born and diagnosed at a pretty early age with a bunch of learning disabilities, things like sleep apnea, narcolepsy, dyslexia, ADD, a lot of the sort of typical things that you may hear the LD or learning disabilities kind of community talk about. The problem was that when I was given this diagnosis, I didn't know I was stupid until they told me, and they gave me a report to prove it, and that's really what I believed. And it's not necessarily that they told me that, but when you give a kid a report that says that you're inadequate and not able to do the things that your classmates are able to do easily, it's easy to believe that you're stupid. And so, I was at a time in my life, I was 11 years old, and I couldn't write my alphabet from A to Z. And that's something that I actually shared in the TED Talk, which seems to be like how can you not know your alphabet from A to Z and be 11 years old? And, I grew up from that moment until the time I graduated high school. I never passed a grade on my own merit. I either went to summer school or I just got pushed through because I was sort of a class clown, and the teacher just didn't want to deal with me again next year. And, the only thing, Brian, that really saved my life was the fact that I had been gifted with some height and some athletic ability. And so I was a pretty good athlete, had a really good sort of high school career, won a bunch of state championships and played really well enough, in fact, to play Division I basketball. One of my other issues was, though, is my grades were so bad, not many people wanted me. But Liberty University in Lynchburg, Virginia really took a chance on me, and went the first year and could not play. I had to redshirt because my grades were so poor. And it was really a challenging time for me because I was, a freshman in college. I couldn't do what I needed to do academically to be able to do what I wanted to do athletically. And so I really struggled, went through a lot of depression and had a subpar career in college as a result. I did actually get to play because I got my GPA from 1.4 to 1.9, which was just well enough to play. And then I reached this moment where I got a phone call from Sarah, who was my academic advisor. And when I walked in her office, she was really upset at me. And I had had plenty of teachers who had been upset at me in the past. And that wasn't new to me. But it was weird because she seemed not like frustrated, or like most teachers would get mad at me because I procrastinated, or I didn't come to class, or I didn't do well, or I acted up, or I disrupted the class. Sarah really got mad at me for a different reason. And this is one of the things that started to shift in me, is she got angry about how I thought about myself, not about the action, not about my actions, but about my mindset. And Sarah looked at me before I could even sit down that day. Sarah pointed at me and she said, "You know what your problem is? Your problem is that you're a victim." And I can remember thinking like how relieved I was to hear that from a teacher that she knew that I was in fact a victim. And, I remember thinking like, gosh, what a relief that finally someone like gets it, that I didn't ask for all these like deficiencies and, dyslexia and narcolepsy and all this crazy stuff. I didn't ask for this. So yeah, of course I'm a victim. And then, she went on to tell me that I was a victim of my own thinking, and told me I was going to come back to her office every day after class until I changed my mind. And so my plan was to do with her what I did with every other teacher, which was wait for her to quit. Because I knew that I had these deficiencies. I had a test and a packet to prove it. I carried that packet to every the first day of every class I'd ever gone to show the teacher that, here, just to let you know, I'm not going to be performing well in this class, and this isn't going to go well for you. So you can either see me again next year or let me through. And so I went back to her class or her office the next day, and she handed me a box of Crazy 8 crayons and a stack of construction paper.
And you were sorry to cut you off. You were in your 20s by this point, right?
I was in my 20s. And I was 6'7", 230 pound Division I athlete. Yeah. So for a lot of people, that would be like super humiliating. It was the most humiliating thing that had ever happened to me. I think, looking back now, one of the things that really helps me from an entrepreneurial standpoint is I'm not afraid to fail because I only failed until I was in my 20s. And that was really way more humiliating because it said something about who I was, and the door stayed open. And so, my teammates would walk past, and anyone who's ever played any kind of athletics at any level knows that your teammates love to have like something they can like get at you about. And man, that was just like, that made their day to see me sitting there with, crayons coloring. But it really ended up changing my life. She read my homework to me and told me to just draw pictures that would remind me of what she was reading. And the whole intent was to teach me that in fact, I just learned differently, and that I could remember and I could recall and retain this information. And over only a couple of weeks, I started to become more comfortable in class. I started to remember and recall. I started to feel more confident when I was taking tests. And that's when at the end of that semester, I can remember having what I described in my TEDx talk as my alarm clock moment.
Yeah.
And I would say I only call it that because at that time I didn't know to call it a quarter life comeback. And so it's that feeling you get when you realize that like your alarm clock didn't go off and you've slept in and you have something really important that you're going to be late for. So you like spring out of bed and you've got like this high anxiety and you try to do everything you can to make up for lost time so that you're not even more late. And that's the feeling I got when I saw my grades at the end of that particular semester. They had gone from a 1.4 to a 3.4. And I realized that Sarah was right and that I had been a victim of my own thinking. And the bad news was I'd wasted a lot of time. The good news was that there was a lot of upside, and I found that it was my choice. And so I knew I needed a mentor, and I knew I needed one really quickly. The problem was I needed a mentor in so many areas. I had no idea where to start. Right? Because academically, I was way behind. Socially, I was behind from in terms of respect for like employers. Like, how am I going to tell an employer that, you know, I had a 3.4 and sort of maintained that through college. But up until then, I was at a 1.4 to 1.9, 3.4. And so I was having a hard time understanding like how I was going to catch up to the rest of humanity. And I needed a mentor. And so I started doing this research on mentorship and how to find a mentor and how to develop really quickly to catch up. Because I had this like alarm clock feeling. I felt like I needed to catch up as quickly as I could.
Yeah. Can I jump in there? So I want you to remember like exactly what you were going to say there. But just something on the victim mindset before, because mentorship is what I want to really get into in this episode. But I want to go back to the victim mindset. Do you think a lot of that was related to the fact that you had these diagnoses and someone was saying, like, labeling you as you are this and that, like ADD and all the rest of it? And I mean, it's something I've seen a lot with people in this sort of age group, and even in myself often, is that victim mindset, thinking like things are happening to us because of outside circumstances and that's just how things are. But like, how do we get over that victim mindset?
You know, I think that's an important point, and that's something that has to be talked about more. I mean, I can remember when I was being diagnosed, I was told that I had not that I have this, but you are this, right? And I would have been much better off if they would have said, you have ADD, you have dyslexia, you have narcolepsy. But instead, the message that I got is that you are a ADD, you are narcolepsy, you are dyslexic, right?
Yeah.
And so there's a difference between having something and being something. And if I have something, I can actively fight against it because I am outside of that thing. It's like, you know, if you get cancer, you have cancer. You're not cancer. And so you can fight against cancer the same way you can fight against a deficiency or find a way around a deficiency. And you know, I look back and all of those people were really well-meaning, right? I mean, these teachers cared about me. My parents cared about me. They loved me. They wanted what was best. What they didn't have was maybe the language or the tactics to help me work through it as an adolescent. And so I decided and I accepted that. So part of it is I had people in my life that didn't help me define it well. But the biggest part of it was that I decided to accept that as my reality.
Yeah. And I suppose in terms of like getting through that, I'm sure once you saw that the different learning styles started making an impact and your results improved, you realize like you don't have to be that.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. You know, I've learned that skills really drive attitude. And so when you can learn a new skill or demonstrate something to yourself, then your attitude about that thing or about your development goes up. And the more you do that, it just continues to cycle up.
Yeah, it's kind of like confidence comes from action. Action doesn't come from confidence. The same type of thing.
Same principle. That's right.
Yeah. Cool. So let's move on to the mentorship thing. And it's something that I think is a huge factor for people in their 20s, also, you know, general success. But Are we getting mentorship wrong in the current sort of idea of mentorship?
I think so. I think a lot of times when we talk about mentorship, what we're really describing is apprenticeship. We're asking someone to teach us how to do something that they know how to do. And 100 years ago, that was a good plan because there wasn't a sufficient amount of knowledge that each person had. So you really had to have a connection or a person to give you an opportunity to learn something, right? Like you were if you wanted to be a blacksmith, you had to find a blacksmith.
Yeah, and if there were no like Google Maps or phones, so it had to be someone in your area, like pretty much.
Exactly. So we were very limited in terms of knowledge. The difference between then and now is everyone has the entire history of knowledge and everything that's available to planet Earth in their pocket.
Yeah.
Right? It's on their phone. It's on their computers. If you have access to the internet, knowledge isn't the issue. And so we don't need apprentices in the same way. Now, there's still a lot of value for that one-on-one coaching, but you don't have to have that to develop. And so it goes back to sort of the quote that kind of is my foundation for mentorship in general, which is a quote by Ralph Waldo Emerson that I came across right after I had my quarter life crisis or my alarm clock moment. And he says, "In my walks, every man I meet is my superior in some way, and in that I learn from him."
Yeah, and I think that's a perfect segue into sort of the bulk of your TED Talk, which we'll definitely link to in the show notes. But it's all about the 5.5 mentors. So I was wondering if you could share what those 5.5 mentors are for everyone listening.
Sure. So I sort of created these in retrospect, right? Like when I first started, I didn't know that this is really what I was doing until I looked back and said, wait a second, I could probably name these groups, these 5.5 mentors. And so the first one, and I'm going to go in a little bit different order than what I went in my TED Talk, because I've had some realizations about their relationship to my development, and I think the potential relationship to your listeners' development, even since the talk. So the first one I found was a mentor that I call my categorical mentor. And so my categorical mentor, when I think of a categorical mentor, I think of like a big file cabinet with arms and legs and a head. And it's someone that I can pull out, the file, and I can look at their life categorically in different areas, and I can take the things I want and leave the other things that maybe I don't want. Because I think people in their 20-somethings, they look at successful people and they say, I want to be like that person. So they replicate everything about that person, and they don't realize that person may be incredibly unhappy because of one flaw they have, and they replicate that flaw on purpose.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
That is so huge. It's something that I've kind of come across myself and experienced myself. And I think it's quite a dangerous trap that people can fall into. Is they think, say, for example, they see an entrepreneur who's killing it now, but who, struggled in the beginning, and they think, well, I need to struggle still. And so that is a huge one.
Right. A perfect example of that is my own grandfather, right? My grandfather, I looked up to. He was a great businessman, super smart guy. He went from literally nothing to within like 5 years, he owned 5 furniture stores and paid cash to build them, stock them, and do everything. And he really started with a yard sale. Brilliant guy. So many things I could get from him. But there was one thing that I look at now that I say, you know what? There's one part that I need to leave alone, which is his overall work ethic. He had his first heart attack and his first triple bypass surgery when he was 50 years old. He passed away when he was 78 years old. And I know that if he would have worked a little differently, he may have been a little less successful. He would have still been incredibly wealthy, and he would still be here, and I'd still be enjoying a relationship with him. And so I look at that and say, the best way for me to honor my grandfather is categorically to look at his life and replicate the things that are positive and not replicate the things that are negative.
Cool. Gotcha.
And so that's been a big takeaway for me.
Cool. So that's our categorical mentor, kind of finding the areas of our life we want to improve and modeling people who sort of possess those qualities that we want to model. What's the next mentor?
So the next one is the time machine mentor. This is the probably the easiest one and the most quote unquote digital mentor for me. These are the people that I can't like meet up for lunch or have over to my house to talk to. These are people from the past that have left some sort of a legacy for me to be able to learn from. For me, it's people like, Dale Carnegie, Abraham Lincoln, like Jesus, Gandhi, like people that aren't here today, but there's a wealth of information and wisdom for us to be able to learn from. And it's like the quote that says the man that does not read has no advantage over the man that cannot read, which I think is really powerful. So for me, one of the big mentors are people that I can read. And, you talk about having access to some of the world's best and brightest people, like read Seth Godin's blog every day. If you want a mentor in marketing,
yeah,
and so there's so much to be gained there. So that one's a little shorter, but that one's been really powerful for me. And no matter how you intake it, right? So for me, because of dyslexia and some of the other things that I battle, I'm a huge audiobook guy. And so, podcast, audiobook, I mean, this is you are a perfect example of a digital mentor that people can have without ever needing your permission.
Yeah, and what I loved in your talk as well is that you mentioned the fact that experience is for fools, and why learn from experience and have to go through a failure to learn something when you can learn from other people's failures already. So that's
exactly right.
Yeah,
that's exactly right. The biggest and best experiences I've had are only pale in comparison to the things that I haven't had to go through, right? I mean, everybody, if someone else has gone through it and you can learn from it, like, why go through the pain? I think it's silly.
Yeah, cool. Who's our next mentor?
So our next one is the stealth mentor. So when I think about the stealth mentor, I think about like a ninja or like a little kid sneaking through the kitchen to steal a cookie out of the cookie jar when like no one's looking. And I think a lot of times we take mentorship and we make it this big thing. Like we need to have a contract, we need to have an agreement, we need to ask someone to mentor us. When the truth is that anytime I'm in public, there are dozens, hundreds, or thousands of mentors that I can learn from if I decide to. And so, this is a perfect example in this conversation, in that I get an opportunity to interact with someone that I think is doing some interesting and really meaningful work and learn some stuff, and be mentored in a sort of a stealthy way. And you don't necessarily have to have that big agreement or that conversation. You just have to ask questions.
Yeah, that's this one. It kind of reminds me of. So I have someone who I actually interviewed him on one of the previous episodes, Craig Wilkinson, and he's probably the more traditional model for me of what people call a mentor. But I've never said to him like, "Will you be my mentor?" It's always like, "Can we meet for coffee or lunch or whatever it may be?" And then I just ask him things that I've sort of been picking my brain over and sort of get his intake on it. So yeah, I mean, mentorship as a whole, when people ask me about it, I keep saying it doesn't need to be this formal, intimidating, like, "Will you be my mentor?" type of thing. Like,
right.
Just send someone an email, like, get their reply if they do. If they don't, they're probably pretty busy. Don't take it personally. But if they tell you to do something, like, take action on it and then let them know how the results went.
That's right. I think a lot of times it's almost like dating, right? Like people that aren't good at dating or that aren't in a relationship and they don't know why, it's because typically they make it into this like big thing. When if you really want to meet someone and have a meaningful relationship, it typically starts out by saying, "Hey, would you like to hang out? Would you like to have a cup of coffee? I'm interested and would like to know more about you." You don't lead with, "I think I'm in love with you and I want to marry you." Right? And that's how people do mentorship a lot of times. They want to send Simon Sinek an email and say, "Hey, Simon, I love you. I want to take up a lot of your time," right? Instead of finding the guy down the street that knows a little more than you and saying, "Hey, let's have coffee. I have a couple of questions that I'd be interested in in what you have to say." Right?
Yeah. I love it. Cool. So how many we got? I think we got 2.5 left.
We've got 2.5 left, so we'll breeze through these. So number 4 is my Street View mentor. My Street View mentor, I think of like when you're driving down the interstate, and the person that's in my passenger seat is my Street View mentor. Someone that's sort of on the same level, that shares the same perspective. They're seeing the same road and ultimately have the same destination. And so for me, there have been friends in my life. There have been relatives. The overarching Street View mentor that I have is my wife. And so she knows that when I start to kind of like swerve or go or move into oncoming traffic, she's there to kind of help me, pull me back and level me and ground me and say, "Look, this isn't the direction we're going, and you're better off going in this direction." So it's someone that is willing to be kind to you more than they're willing to be nice to you, and willing to love you enough or care about you enough to make you uncomfortable when you're doing something that's not helpful to your future.
Cool. So kind of like an accountability partner or mastermind
That's right.
member or something like that. Cool.
That's exactly right. Yep. And I see that as someone oftentimes kind of on the same level, right? And that's, in a lot of ways, that's sort of the relationship that Jason and I have started to sort of develop. That we see things in the same way. We're in similar work, and so he could look at me and say, "Dude, that's a stupid idea," and it's not insulting because I know where his heart is when he says that, right? And I think we all need those relationships to some capacity in our life, and they're incredibly important.
Yeah, and it'd be cool taking a stealth mentor and turning them into a Street View mentor.
Yeah, that's exactly, and that is the exact way that I would tell you that my and Jason's relationship sort of happened, and our friendship has sort of grown. Is I just thought he was super interesting, and so I asked him questions, and he was interested, so he asked me questions, and then it just turned into to developing sort of holistically. I didn't go up to him and tell him that I was that I was enamored and falling in love, right? It's something a little different than that.
Well, you used the term fanboy on Facebook, so
yeah. Well, now I'm a complete. I'm like his. I am, in fact, I think his biggest fan. I love his work, and I just don't think there is a more genuine and kind person in his space. Yeah. So I think he's doing a great job.
Yeah, I actually listened to a podcast with him and Jacob Sokol right before this. So that was pretty cool.
Yeah.
All right, so who's our final full mentor?
Yeah, our final full mentor. So what I found was once I started deploying these first 4, and not until then did the 5th and final full mentor sort of show up for me. And that's what I call the worldview mentor. So the worldview mentor is really kind of the definition that most people would think of as a mentor. There's someone that their perspective is way higher than yours. They can kind of see, based on what you want, they can see what that future may look like, either because of knowledge or experience. And so I found that this is what most people are looking for. Right? They want that Yoda, that person who just I'm going to ask a question. They're going to tell me what to do. I'm going to do it, and it's going to turn out okay. But for me, that person didn't show up until I was deploying these other ones. And really, it was an attitude and a mindset. And what I found is that mentors in the traditional sense, they seek out and they want to help people that are learning from other people already, that are reading and understanding the past, that are willing to be inquisitive and ask questions to everyone they meet in sort of a stealthy way.
So they know they're not going to waste their time sort of spending time with
That's right.
Yeah.
Yep. And that's the ROI for a mentor. I mean, my mentor now, his name's Tom Brazil, and I know that there's nothing that I can do in my life to pay him back. And the only thing that I can do is to sort of give that away to someone else at some point. And I also know that Tom wouldn't be willing to invest the time and energy and effort into me and my development if I weren't able to deploy these other mentors first.
Cool. And then let's get on to the half mentor then.
Yep. So
I'm sure people are really interested to hear what this is all about.
Yeah, so the half mentor, I only made it a half. I didn't make it a whole because I believe it's important enough to be on the list, but not as important to spend as much time with this mentor as the other one. And for me, that's what I call the anti-mentor. And in the TED Talk, I don't define it the same way I define all the other ones, because I think when I say anti-mentor, someone pops into your head already. I don't need to define that, because you know that person that is either in your life now or has been in the past, where you can look at and say, you know what, I don't want to be like that person.
Oh, hell no.
Yeah, like nothing about that person do I want to be like. And it's so important to know what you don't want. And I think when you know exactly the things that you don't want, it can help you clarify the things that you do want.
Yeah, that's huge. In one of the previous solo episodes I did, it was called I think it was episode 13. It was called Not This. And it was referencing a quote by Elizabeth Gilbert, or a post that she wrote on Facebook about, like, you know, even if you don't know what you want or where you're going, knowing what you don't want is like equally as important, and working towards that. So yeah, that's really cool. And then, so these 5.5 mentors are all kind of bracketed around level 0, which you mentioned in your talk, which is, you know, nothing's going to help you unless you're willing to help yourself. That's kind of what level 0 is all about, right?
That's right. That's right. 0 is the percentage of responsibility that any of these mentors or anyone else on the planet has toward your personal development. And that's why we call it personal development.
Yeah, and that kind of ties back into the victim thing again, is like, well, they're not helping me enough.
That's right. That's right. And now more than any other time in the history of humanity, can you take these people, the people that are around you, the people that are online, the people that you'll interact with tomorrow, and learn and develop because of your interactions with them. And you have the world at your fingertips. And it really ends up being a decision to be willing to be mentored. That's it.
Yeah, something that I like doing, which it kind of ties into like the stealth mentor type of thing, or categorical even, is I'm a bit of an Evernote geek. So every time I keep a notebook, or just a note, and every time I come across something that someone said or done, I write it down in there as things to like kind of model and remember that inspired me.
That's awesome. I love that. I'm a little bit of a Evernote nerd myself.
Doug, I want to test out a question that I thought of randomly the other day, and it's probably going to be a curveball, but let's see where we go with it.
All right.
Something that I'm thinking of asking all guests in future is, if this podcast episode had to become the most influential, impactful thing that someone in their 20s has listened to, what would I need to ask you, and how would you answer that?
Wow, that is a little bit of that's a good curveball. Give me the question one more time so I can answer it well.
So if I had to ask you one question in order for this interview to be the most sort of impactful or influential thing that 20-somethings could listen to, what would that question need to be, and how would you answer it?
You know, I think the question that more and more millennials or quarter lifers or whatever, however we want to define it, are asking themselves is, what do I do with all of these options that I have?
Yeah.
And so I think if we could answer that question for your listeners, I think that would be probably the most meaningful answer I think that could be given.
Yeah, because it's true, right? So we said we live in a time where we've got every bit of knowledge and mentorship we want right in our pocket, but that's kind of like paralysis by overanalysis, where you have so
That's right.
much information coming in that you don't know what to listen to and what to take notice of.
That's right. It's a gift and a curse, really, right? Because none of us would rather be living in a world where if your dad makes shoes, then you make shoes because your grandfather and his great grandfather made shoes, and that's the only available option. We wouldn't trade for that, and so all of these options are really good, and it's good stuff, but it can become sensory overload, and I think it's unfair, just in general, to expect someone that has not really lived a lot of professional life to decide when they're, 17, 18, what they're going to be doing for the rest of their life. So I think the best advice I can give is dude, you don't have to choose. You don't have to choose right now. If you're hearing this and you're 16, do something that's exciting, do something you think is interesting, and know that you don't have to make a decision unless you want to be really specific and you already know, right? You want to be a surgeon, you're going to kind of have to go to school, and you're going to kind of have to be there for a long time in order to do that. But if you want to be an entrepreneur, you don't have to choose what business you're going to have right now. Start a business and do something interesting. It doesn't have to be as complicated as we make it. And understanding that you can do anything you want, you just can't do everything you want.
Yeah, I heard that today. I love that.
Oh, I thought I just made it up. Darn.
I heard Michael Hyatt say it, but I'll maybe edit that out, so I'll still give you the
No, it's all good. It's all good. He does good work as well.
Yeah, he's awesome. Doug, I want to be mindful of the time, but if people are listening to this and they want to check out your work and find out more about what you're all about, where can they get in touch?
Sure. The best place is my website. It's dougstewart919.com.
Cool. And I'll link to all the stuff we mentioned and your TED Talk, especially in the show notes, and all your social media channels so people can check that out. And before I get to the final question, I just want to take a second to acknowledge you for, being labeled when you were young, but not letting that define you, and showing people that it is possible to learn one way or another and to turn things around. I mean, for someone stuck at a 1.4, we don't really work with the same system here, but I know that prospects aren't really good if you write down the bottom there.
They're not.
But you could easily have said, well, this is me and I'm stupid and I'm not going to be anything one day. But you've turned that around, and now you're coaching other people and speaking. And something that I loved in your TED Talk is you said, I had a speaking disability, but now I speak to people, and I was dyslexic and now I get paid to write. And I love that. So I just wanted to acknowledge you for that. And the final question that I have is, what one action can listeners take this week to start creating their own quarter life comeback?
Forgive yourself for your weaknesses and double down on your strengths.
I love it. Doug Stewart, thank you so much for coming on the Quarter Life Comeback.
Thank you, my friend. Keep doing great work.
There you have it, guys. That wraps up episode 22 of the Quarter Life Comeback podcast. Still can't believe we've reached 22 episodes, but a big thank you to Doug Stewart again for coming on. And if you like this episode, make sure you share it around with your friends and shoot me a tweet at Brian Tier and let me know what your biggest takeaways were. For me, it's the idea of, mentorship doesn't have to be this difficult, intimidating thing. It can be following people who inspire you, and particularly, the categorical mentor, as Doug mentioned, where you highlight areas of your life that you want to improve and find people that embody the way that you want to model that and just copy them pretty much. If you like this episode, make sure you check out episode 13, episode 15, and episode 19, which I've linked in the show notes. And you can get those together with all the other links and resources we mentioned in the show at briantier.com/022. Thanks once again for joining me. And until next week, keep creating your quarter life comeback.
Thanks for listening to the Quarter Life Comeback. Get started today by visiting briantier.com.